source of my death denial. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. You guys know this. My name is Quinn Jacobson. This is the Studio Q show live at this moment. And welcome everybody. This is great. We have a lot to do today. We're going to have to get right on this. And hello, Jan and Will from PA, and Dale's lurking there, and Gavin Maitland. Somebody new there. I'm glad you're interested. I hope I can fulfill your interest there. Shadows in the North. There you go. That's a good metaphor we're going to use today. We got a great show. Number one, we're going to give you a little introduction to my preoccupation and obsession, the infamous, if you will, or the famous, I don't think he's infamous, the famous Ernest Becker, and the cultural anthropologist and death denial. And we're going to talk about that book. And I'm going to slowly weave these little series into a culmination of 5 parts, trying to break it down and trying to let you in my head, and Becker's head, and Solomon's head, and maybe even Mark Zimmerman's head, and look at the place from where this art springs, these activities spring, the whole activity of human beings. I know this is a big comment, but the whole activity of human beings revolve around these ideas. So if you can hang with me and bear with me, I hope I can pull this off, and you will get something out of it, especially as an artist or photographer. Mark's going to come on here. He's on board here. He's going to show us some of his wonderful work, his graduate work, thesis project. And he's also going to describe and articulate to everyone out there his process of what he went through and how this kind of stuff changed him. And so, yeah, it's going to be great. Hello, Linda from Sweden. Yes, good to see you. And we have Analog from the UK. Wonderful. And Pablo está en el nitrate. Pablo is in the silver nitrate. That's awesome. I love it. You know, two Spanish words, plata y plata. Plata y plata. Those are difficult, right? Plate and silver. They're difficult. Marcus says, hi guys. Hey, Paul. Oh, good to see you. Good to see you. Tax denial too. Oh my God, Paul. I don't even want to talk about taxes. I just got it the other day. It sucks. Changed my life. I'm in complete death denial over it. So welcome. Paul's going to get a lot out of this. Thilo in Japan. Awesome. Thank you for joining us. And John, he's out there again, and from Norway. And Will, great. Good. Good to see everybody. So let's do this. I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to get over here and start our I kicked myself out right there, right? Death denial. See what happens? My death anxiety got the best of me right there. No, we're going to go through this. That's an early death. Where'd you go? Yeah, I clicked my browser window down. Sorry, guys. That's a quick, a lighthearted way to tackle a very, very difficult, very extremely difficult topic to deal with, but we're going to do it. So we call this, everybody in this room should know what memento mori is. It's not the first time you're going to hear this today, but everyone knows what that is in this room. I'm sure you do. It's Latin for remember you're going to die. That's memento mori. And we know as photographers and artists, creators, people that work, in these areas, we know deep down inside, there's a part or a big part of us that do this work because unconscious, psychological, unconscious, subconscious activity is driving us. And this is the point I'm going to make in this series. I'm going to try to teach what I've learned about Becker, death denial, death anxiety, Dr. Sheldon Solomon's work, and Greenberg, his partners in crime, the worm at the core, terror management theory. All these words will mean something to you, hopefully, after I'm finished here. So let's get on with this. We're going to do an introduction to Ernest Becker, The Denial of Death, Part 1 of 5. We're going to do the photo review and critique work by Mark Zimmerman. He's in the room here. And then do recommended reading and recommended watching. Here's where we're going to start, ladies and gentlemen. This is mankind's terrible, most awful burden that we're endowed with, if you will. What does it mean to be a self-conscious animal? What does that mean? A self-conscious animal. You know, a beaver and a dog and a cat doesn't know that they're going to die. The idea is ludicrous, if not monstrous. It means to know that one is food for worms. This is the terror. To have emerged from nothing, to have a name, consciousness of self. I exist. I'm here. I know that. A deep inner feelings, an excruciating inner yearning for life and self-expression, no doubt. And with all this, yet to die. Now, that takes a minute to absorb, but once you get onto this, once you start understanding, it's kind of a psychological kick in the groin, if you will, but once you start understanding what this all means, you're going to start getting in touch with your own death anxiety and what drives you and why you do what you do. This was my huge revelation. My revelation, I struggled for decades, literally, with why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I photographing these marginalized people? Why am I so preoccupied with these ideas? What they really were questions, and Becker answered those questions for me. So I don't take this lightly at all. This is a very serious kind of endeavor for me. So number one, you're self-conscious. The reality is that you're food for worms. You're no more significant than a lizard or a potato, as Sheldon Solomon says. But the real idea behind Becker's theories are this anxiety, this knowledge of death, because we have this big temporal lobe here, that created the problem. The very thing that made us so unique and important created the problem of the knowledge of our death, which is ironic, right? The idea of death, the fear of it, haunts the human animal like nothing else. It's the mainspring of human activity. If I had one quote to show from Becker, it would be this. It's the mainspring of human activity. And unfortunately, it's the bad side. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what drives both creatively, politically, every other way in this kind of these ideas. The vital lie is man or woman's refusal to acknowledge his or her own mortality. That's the vital lie. That's what we have to tell ourselves every day. We have to repress this anxiety. And our culture, we'll talk about culture and heroism and all this, but our culture gives us tools to buffer or stave off that anxiety, that death anxiety. If, and I'll show a quote of this, if you were totally aware of what I'm talking about right now, every human being on this planet, I don't care what country you're in, what color you are, what language you speak, every human being, if you were fully aware of this knowledge and grasped it and thought about it every day, you would be curled up on the floor in the corner. And as Solomon says, grasping for sedatives the size of your head. That's how devastating this knowledge is if you don't manage it and maintain it, or if you're aware of it. Most people say, I don't even think about death. We're going to talk about that. But this is the vital lie, the refusal to acknowledge your mortality. Every human being is part of this. No one gets out of this alive. This is the only thing I'm going to talk about photography right now. Mark can elaborate on some of these because his work will just dovetail right into this little lecture. It'll be beautiful, I think. We talked about that. All photographs are memento mori, meaning all photographs remind you that you're going to die. To take a photograph is to participate in another person's or thing's mortality, vulnerability, mutability, precisely by slicing out this moment and freezing it. All photographs testify to time's relentless melt. Beautiful quote, perfectly sums up. This was written in, I want to say 75 or 77. On Photography is a collection of essays. We've reviewed it a little bit. It's a pretty dense book, but Sontag is deep in the rabbit hole with Becker here in photography, about photography. So that's just the quote. Let me introduce you to Ernest Becker. He's been kind of preoccupied my mind for a lot of time. His books, he's a cultural anthropologist. His books and his thinking and writing has really affected the way I think about everything, not just my photography, but everything. He wrote several books on the human motivation and behavior, most notably the 1974 Pulitzer Prize winning book, The Denial of Death. He argues that the basic motivation for human behavior is our biological need to control our basic anxiety, to deny the terror of death. And I know a lot of you guys are probably clicking out of here by now, but a lot of you are thinking that, hey, I don't even think about this stuff. What does this have to do with, bromides and iodides? I don't even think about this stuff. I use a Dallmeyer 3B lens. It's an f3. Why are you talking about this? Right? But you do. Maybe it's not the right time for you to hear this, but in the end, if you pay attention to this and you ruminate and think about this a little bit, you're going to find this applies across the board to every human being. Becker suggested that a significant function of culture, and I'll define what he means by culture, is to provide successful ways to engage in death denial. Our world is full, our culture is full of ways for you to grab onto and repress that anxiety and deny that. And he calls these buffers. He talks about heroism and buffers. These cultural buffers keep us from thinking about death too much, right? We'll get into this. Becker also noted the root of evil lies in the selfishness of human beings seeking to protect their own existence in the face of their mortality, which he regarded as an essential aspect of human nature. Recognizing such evil within human beings gave Becker concern about the future of human society. Very well, too. I mean, and I'm not just talking about genocide and maligning the other and finding people to scapegoat and all this. We'll talk about these ideas around Becker's theory about death denial. I'm talking about even climate, environmental, how we react to our death anxiety and what we do to the environment around us. And there's some good data out there about reacting to this through your death anxiety. By ignoring our mortality and vulnerability, we build up an unreal sense of self, and we act out of a false sense of who we are and what we are. This is another very powerful statement. Now I look at every photograph and every artist and every statement and every conversation I have and everything I see, I filter it through Becker's theories. And it's an amazing thing. I can't even articulate it right now, but it's an amazing thing to see how fully developed and how reality-based these theories are. And they're all repressed, right? Freud talked about the human condition as sexual repression. And of course, there's a lot of sexual repression in human beings. But Becker said, let's move it up one notch. We're talking about death anxiety here, repression of death anxiety. This is what drives us. So he talks about we act out of a false sense of who we are and what we are, meaning we take on these cultural buffers to keep that repressed so we don't fear it. And so we act out kind of fake. We're phony. We're not dealing with the reality of where we're at and who we are. Second, as members of society, we tend to identify with one or another immortality system. And I'll talk to you about this, immortality projects and immortality systems. That is, we identify with a religious group, a political group, engage in some kind of cultural activity, or adopt a certain culturally sanctioned viewpoint that we invest with ultimate meaning and to which we ascribe absolute and permanent truth. These ideas are to repress that anxiety so we can function, so we're not in the corner, like I said, like Solomon says, reaching for sedatives the size of your head. This inflates us with a sense of invulnerable righteousness. And then we have to protect ourselves against the exposures of our absolute truth, being just one more mortality-denying system among others. which we can only do by insisting that all other absolute truths are false. So let me boil that down. I'm of X religion or X political views, and you're of the other one. And we come head to head. Well, our death anxiety, when you challenge our belief systems, that's going to trigger that anxiety. So now we have to act on that. If your truth is right and mine's not, I'm threatened by that, and vice versa. So that's what he's talking about here. We can only do this by insisting that all other absolute truths are false. Okay? So we attack, degrade, preferably kill the adherents of different mortality denying absolute truth systems. So the Protestants kill the Catholics, the Muslims vilify the Christians, and vice versa. Upholders of the American way of life denounce communists. The communist Khmer Rouge slaughters all the intellectuals in Cambodia. The Spanish Inquisition tortures heretics, and all good students of the Enlightenment demonize religion as the source of all evil. The list could go on and on. You start getting this idea of, oh my God, really? This repressed anxiety is doing this? Yes. I am so thoroughly, not only is it that big level stuff, it's my own personal stuff. I've always wondered why do we treat people who are different than us so poorly, usually, right? You come up on them, you can't convince them to come over to your side. The ultimate thing is, in the words of Solomon, our God is better than your God, and we'll kick your ass to prove it, right? That is the end result of all of this. So you start getting the idea now. Jumping quickly to the birth and death of meaning. And it's really interesting how he used meaning here. Becker sought to reconcile the fundamental human contradiction between the mind and body. He described the human being as a creature of meaning who, unlike any other natural creature, lives in two worlds, the natural and the supernatural, the world of matter and the world of meanings, suspended halfway between the animal and the divine. So it's really important. Phrases like gods with anuses, gods with clay feet. He uses these ideas of deity and power in a way, because we're animals, but we are elevated, right? We have this big frontal lobe here. We can think abstractly. We can envision things like a house in the mountains and make it happen. It's incredible stuff. In Kierkegaard's word, awe and dread. It's amazing. In the revised version of The Birth and Death of Meaning in 71, he included his understanding of human fear of mortality. He argued, and this is before death denial, right? This is leading up to his death denial book. He argued that human beings, like all living creatures, have a physical body that is born and dies. The fear of death that humans experience, though, lies not so much in the death of the body, right? Not so much in the death of the body, but in the death of meaning. In the death of meaning. For it is meaning that defines all the human self and society. So we're really talking about the death of meaning. When we talk about the death anxiety, we're talking about we need to find ourselves meaningful in a world that means something. It's significant in a world that means something. And that meaning, when we have a fear of that meaning, that we're not meaningful, goes away, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. Birth and Death and Meaning. It's another great read, but yeah. Becker's The Denial of Death was published in 73. He received the Pulitzer Prize, General Nonfiction, in 74 after his death. The basic premise of The Denial of Death is that human civilization is ultimately an elaborate, symbolic defense mechanism against the knowledge of mortality. Since human beings have a dualistic nature consisting of a physical self and a symbolic self, we can transcend the dilemma of mortality through heroism, a concept involving the symbolic half. And I'll talk about that. So now he's laid out what the problem is. He's given us our position. We're both kind of like little gods and worm food at the same time. And now he's going to talk about this dualistic nature, the physical self and the symbolic self. And symbolic self is very important, especially as an artist. You'll understand these concepts, I bet. Becker describes the human pursuit of immortality projects. Here, I was going to tell you a minute ago, we're going to talk about that. Immortality projects are causa sui, a Latin word comes from within, right? Causa sui. We create or become part of something that we feel will outlast our time on earth. Get that again. Immortality projects are causa sui, from within, in which we create or become part of something that we feel will outlast our time on earth. So every photograph you make, even though you're not thinking about it consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously, that's an immortality project. You're trying to put something here that will outlast you, and symbolically that you will live on forever. I think every artist can kind of connect with that. It sounds a little egotistical, but it's how we're wired, right? In doing so, we feel that we become heroic and part of something eternal that will never die. Again, meaning versus human bodies, things like that, compared to the physical body that will eventually die. This gives human beings the belief that our lives have meaning, purpose, and significance in the grand scheme of things. This is what we're blessed or cursed with, our frontal lobe, right? Our ability, that big honking chunk of stuff up there, our ability to think abstractly and have these dilemmas of death and death anxiety. That's the only reason we have it, is that big chunk of brain up there. The real world, this is what I was talking about. You're in the corner grabbing for those gigantic sedatives the size of a Buick. I think Woody Allen said that too, I'm not sure. The real world is simply too terrible to admit. It tells man and woman that he or she is a small, trembling animal who will someday decay and die. Man, if I haven't bugged you out now, this is pretty bummery kind of thing. Culture changes all of this, makes man seem important, vital to the universe, immortal in some way. So we got the vital lie, denying our death of meaning, death of body, everything, mostly death of meaning. Sheldon will talk about homo mortalis, right? Homo sapiens, homo mortalis, the eternal man. When people say, can anybody, let me throw a question out there right now. What is the purpose of life, in your opinion? What is the purpose of life, in your opinion? According to Becker and this crew, there are two reasons we exist. Anybody? Obsession with archival. Yes, oh, no, oh yeah, they're just saying obsession. Okay, two reasons we're here. Nobody? To survive and to breed. That's why we're here. Two reasons. To survive, to be happy. No, unfortunately not, Will. To survive and to breed. That just like the lizard and the bird and the mule deer and the elk. We're here to survive and breed. But because of this thing up here, we go down the rabbit hole, right? Meaning that, Paul, that's exactly what Becker's talking about. But that is a construct from our repression of death anxiety. But that's a good one. Meaning is huge. From this premise, mental illness is most insightfully extrapolated as a difficulty in one's hero system. So the hero system means you take this culture and you become an artist, or you become part of a religion, or you become part of a political system. In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to break down the three different kind of heroic structures that a human being can find themselves under. But you're going to pull on one of these, and Becker talks about a genuine heroism too, but it's uncommon. But you're going to pull in one of these types of ways to deal with your anxiety through the cultural system that you live in. And this applies to all cultures. Doesn't just American or European, no, all cultures, it doesn't matter. When someone experiences depression, their causa sui, or their immortality projects or their heroism project, is failing. And they are being constantly reminded of their mortality and insignificant as a result. So he even chimed in about mental illness and about death anxiety. And once those cultural constructs start to fail someone, they feel insignificant, they don't have an immortality project, they're not preoccupied with making wet collodion photographs of portraits or landscapes or whatever else. Once that system fails them, they become depressed. And he talks about schizophrenia even going even farther, which is it creates their own hero, right? Becker argued that the conflict between contradictory immortality projects, particularly in religion, is a wellspring for the violence and misery in the world caused by wars, genocide, racism, nationalism, and so forth, since immortality projects that can contradict one another threaten one's core belief and sense of security. That's the bottom line. That is the bottom line. Yeah, Chopper got it there. To breed and witness life. To breed and survive. To survive and breed. Yeah. So you got to survive to breed. But yeah, I get you. I hear you there. That's a good one. Becker also made the point that humankind's traditional hero systems, including religion, are no longer convincing in the age of reason. Becker never believed that science could solve the human problem. He declared that people need a new convincing illusions that enable them to feel heroic in the grand scheme of things, a form of symbolic immortality. That's a big one. However, he provided no definitive answer. Somebody asked me that a few weeks ago. Well, what does Becker say to do then? He didn't provide any answers, definitive answer, mainly because he believed that no perfect solution exists. Instead, he hoped that that gradual realization of innate human motivations can help bring about a better world, producing worldviews that offer opportunities for non-destructive heroism. In other words, he said, the only thing we can say is to be aware of your death anxiety and to be aware that when you're acting out against other or someone different than you or ideas. I look at the world today. I've said this a million times. I call it an epistemic crisis, a knowledge crisis, a media literacy crisis, a critical thinking crisis. But really what it is, it's this. It's these divided, here in America, we have these teams, these political teams that are so divided that Becker's theories play out every single day in millions of ways here in this country based on these ideas. And I look at the White House in Washington, D.C. in America was ransacked in January by a group of people. And I look at that symbolic immortality. I look at that group. It's a classic Becker. It fits so well. When you start analyzing what's going on in the world and you look at it through the lens of Becker's theories, it's like a corner joke. It fits beautifully. It dovetails beautifully into that. So he's just saying we hope maybe down the road we can find something a little more. We know we all differ. We all have different views, but rather than lashing out, creating genocide and wars and hurting other people and doing destructive things, we can find heroism that's less destructive or non-destructive, as he says. So he's a cultural anthropologist. He was searching for explanations of why human society develops in the way it does. He was particularly interested in why human society is so violent, why different social groups are so intolerant and hateful of each other. That was my question 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whenever I started photography. That was my question. That's really what drove my photography, was that right there. Why are we so intolerant of one another? Consciousness of death is the primary repression, not sexuality. Becker's book focuses on how we human beings develop strategies to fend off awareness of our mortality and vulnerability and to escape into the feeling that we are immortal. That's our drive. Even though you don't think about it consciously, and the younger you are, the quicker you're going to click out of these lectures, because this is not something on your mind. The little older you get, or if you're a deep thinker, a critical thinker, a philosopher, or deep critical thinker, this stuff will appeal to you because it answers so many questions about the human condition. And here's the summary. Like Becker in his chapter on Kierkegaard and the denial of death, what I've tried to show is that the problem does not lie in the notion of human participation in perishable reality. Rather, where the problem lies is in the self-comforting delusion that one possesses eternal meaning, and especially in the measures people take to defend their feelings of righteousness, invulnerability, especially through aggression. There it is, right there. Authentic faith, by contrast, affirms enduring meaning in the context of an open, if anxious, acceptance of mortality. I'm trying to find myself there. And so one must conclude that there are two opposites to authentic faith. The one is the dogmatic clinging to our immortality projects, right? my God is right, yours is wrong. My political view is right, and yours is wrong. And the other is equally dogmatic insistence that enduring meaning is an illusion. And that's my position. Both of these are denials of our real human situation, making up two sides of the same counterfeit coin. So, next week, if we get through it, I'm going to present the ideas of culture and heroism from Becker's perspective. And I didn't want to drag on with this too long. I wanted to kind of go through. You guys, if you're interested, you can go back through and look at it. You can go look at some materials online. There's tons of it online, and you can get a better grasp if you're interested in this topic. This should appeal to any artist or any creative. So, anything on that? Did that make any sense at all? Any sense at all? I hope it did. I wasn't expecting any questions on that, but if you do have some, let me know. I know it. I know it's heavy. It takes a minute to wrap your head around these ideas. They're not easy to get, especially if you're in certain situations that just don't offer you those kinds of insights. So anyway, before we go, Mark's going to come on here now. But before we do that, let me just do one thing. I gotta do this. Simon, I got your book, brother. Thank you for this. Anybody know what irononaut is? What irononaut is? No? I didn't either until I got the book. And there's Simon there. Let's see. This is a great little book. If you're interested in it, you should get it. Get a copy from him. Oneironaut. I'm sorry, I mispronounced that. Dream traveler, dream navigator. Greek, Oniris, dream, nautis, seafarer. So thank you, Simon. I appreciate the book. I'm jumping in it. Anyway, I have to thank people for that stuff because, you don't want to be a death denier on that stuff, right? You don't want to have death anxiety over that. So, Mark, will you come on in here and mute yourself and jump on in? I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, Quinn, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Let me first get my ugly mug off the screen and share my screen. Hopefully.
Yeah, do that. I don't know what I'm doing.
Let's see if this works. You guys seeing my my screen? Hopefully, there we go.
Yeah.
I always start off with this because I want to give everyone an idea of kind of where I started before I got into making work about death and mortality. In the 2000s, I graduated, or earlier in the 90s, I graduated from an undergrad degree in photojournalism. So my focus professionally was working for a newspaper in Edmond, Oklahoma. And this was during, again, the 2000s. The second George Bush war was going on. So there was a lot of things to cover locally. And as you could tell, it was just very typical, newspaper photography. That was my job. I was doing work, not really for myself, but for everyone else, documenting history. And so it was a really tough thing when I went from that to this thing called grad school, my MFA. I watched Quinn go through his, and I sought out a lot of different universities. I wanted to do it because I wanted to teach full time, and that's sort of kind of the nature of the beast. You have to go back and get a terminal degree, and a PhD didn't really appeal to me at the time. And so I was like, well, let's go do this MFA. So when that happened, or when I was looking into this, let me see if I can click onto the next slide here. Sorry about this. I think I need to.
Yeah, thanks.
There we go, full screen.
Yeah, if you can.
So, yeah, and I always like to give a shout out to my mentor. This is Woody Gaddis. He unfortunately passed away right before I started grad school. I would have loved to, use him as a reference during this, but he, was an old school, newspaper photographer, speed graphic, all that type of stuff. And so I always like to give a shout out to him because, he made me technically what I am today. But it was really, really tough going into a grad program, realizing that, it's not about the aesthetic as much anymore. It's about, what your work means. What are your concepts? What research are you doing? So that was a big jump for me. And Quinn, I have to laugh. You put that quote up. I got the same quote. This was important. And I've lost everyone's video. Can you hear me still okay? Are we good?
Mark, we're good to go. You're going.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah. You can enlarge your screen though. That looks good.
Yeah. No, that's exactly where I was, and I didn't see anyone's photos. So anyway, yeah, this quote definitely came across when I dug into Susan Sontag's book, and it meant a lot to me because I've always loved photographs. I've always loved family photographs. I've always loved that idea that we could look back at ourselves a long time ago, 1971, which I think was fascinating that The Birth and Death of Meaning that Becker wrote was in 1971. This was the year I was born. So, this was an image that I'll look back at. And that's why a lot of times people will say images will allow us to be immortal, but I question that because I think in a way it definitely shows our mortality, because we can never go back to these places, these times ever again. That snapshot of life, passes on, and what we have are these pieces of paper, pixels, or whatever it may be. So I always like to kind of mix in some family photos when I'm talking about this. I survived the 1970s. This is a photo of mine of my grandfather, who I lost when I was probably a few years older than this. But again, just watching and seeing these photographs, going back and looking at these images of myself, thinking about that passage of time has always been a fascinating interest of mine. So grad school is not for everyone. I almost thought it wasn't for me. That's me on the left. As faculty and other students are talking about my work, this was my midway, which is kind of your middle ground of your work, what you've been exploring. So it's a lot of this. I miss this environment. So I'm glad, Quinn, that you're bringing in people and we're having these discussions, because, it almost looks like I'm going, oh my God, can I run? It's my fight or flight death denial thing happening right there, because you're getting so many questions, you're trying to explain what your work's about, and you're getting a lot of suggestions, you're getting a lot of whys. And so I will tell you, grad school's not for everyone. My first year, I was ready to bail, get out of there. I didn't feel like it was for me, but there was a time my second year, things just really kind of opened up. So my first project had to do with a relationship I had with my father. And so I'm just going to kind of quickly go over this. He passed away in 2002. It was, way too soon, cancer, a typical, unfortunately, Western death that, was in the ICU, on a ventilator, the things that people have experienced, unfortunately, this last year, with this horrible disease that's been happening. But this happened years ago, and, it really hits you. And I know a lot of you have lost parents before. So my first project had to do with me trying to bring this relationship back in a way. I had lost him. I had his things. So essentially what I did is I just explored these portraits I was doing of him. He was a mechanic. I grew up being around him as he was in a shop, repairing radiators, rehauling engines, all of that. So these visuals I was trying to kind of bring back as memories for me to kind of bring that connection back. So my first year of grad school, this was one project I was working on. This is his gloves that he wore, tools that he used. And this is all just black and white, just standard 4x5. I used a really fast lens. The Aero Ectar is a lens I was kind of experimenting with, and just really trying to focus on these small details to kind of almost in a way humanize these objects that he used to use, or in some scenarios, these were completely environments that I found to try to bring back those memories. So once I kind of got through this, I was also at the same time working on a project of a small community, because this is my documentary, kind of my photojournalism in me. I have to get out, I have to explore, I have to meet people. I want to be able to engage, in conversations with my photography. So there's a small little town, typical small, Oklahoma town that had pretty much not quite dried up, but the school had closed, and that was sort of kind of the angle that I closed in on. And this is just an overview map. And this is another thing I'm really interested in, is our mythic West that we still hang on to. Obviously, Oklahoma had several land runs, and I just find that fascinating when I zoomed in on the Google Maps that this contemporary business is called Land Run Farmers Co-op. It's just, I thought that was interesting that popped up, because that also kind of ties in with some other work that I'm doing. But what I ended up doing is focus in on this school. This school had closed in on the 70s and essentially was abandoned. And so I went in with a camera. It was a fascinating place. You just saw this kind of time capsule of the 1970s of this, school that had pretty much closed. They had to, obviously students had to go elsewhere, another school. That happened a lot, especially after World War II, when a lot of people moved to the city. A lot of farms were consolidated, and there just wasn't anything for a lot of these small towns to, a lot of people couldn't get jobs, so they moved away. I kind of focused more on the details of the place. It was definitely just this time capsule. Interesting enough, there was an author, Angie DeBow, who did a lot of work. And Quinn, this kind of crosses over to your work. She did a lot of books on the genocide that happened to the Native Americans, and how Oklahoma especially was a factor in a lot of stuff that had happened, especially with the land and a lot of the stuff that had to do with the 5 civilized tribes. And it's just very fascinating and sad. But this town is where she grew up. So each little room, each little office I went into, there was something new. Each time when I went back, you would see something new. So it was very fascinating. But I will tell you, those were the first 2 projects I had critiqued. But the way I'm talking about it right now wasn't the way I present it at all. And so, I got nailed, man. My faculty was like, this is familiar work. And it wasn't so much about the aesthetic, which I was still really hung up on, the aesthetic, the lenses, the film photography, whatever it may be. It was literally just, I wasn't making connections about why this stuff was important to me. So again, this journey that I was going on in this small community, I kind of expanded, and I started even photographing these changes that I experienced through the months that I was traveling back and forth, because this was probably about an hour away from my hometown, and then another hour away to go to grad school the opposite direction. So this had happened. There was a fire that had happened. This boat had probably been out in this field for years, come back, a week later, and it had completely been burnt. This is an old kind of homestead near the town I was documenting, and you see this kind of before after, literally only months apart. This home had been, this landscape had been like this for years and years and years. And then just a month later, completely collapsed. I think they tried to move the home, didn't go very well as it looks. So I started kind of looking at work from Mark Klett. If you've ever heard of him, he does a lot of reef photography. A lot of this passage of time that happens. How can I want to be able to show that in my photographs, but typically stuff like this, if you think of Mark Klett's work, he did that in the 70s and then revisited in the 90s. But he was also pulling landscapes from the 1860s, collodion and glass plates. So, this would take years and years to solve. And I was just getting these few images, got lucky in a way to be able to show this passage of time. So as I, in grad school, I will say one of the things that helped me so much, and the faculty, obviously the very diverse faculty and students, but, just literally just sitting, at the local pub and just having conversations with other students and, talking about their work, finding out what they're interested in. And so I became very obsessed because when I was in the school, there were all these chalkboards, and I became very obsessed with using chalk as a metaphor in a way to show a passage of time. So I found some limestone locally, some crushed limestone that actually comes from Oklahoma, the ground in Oklahoma, and I started exploring this as a way to make images. I mean, it completely was an opposite, as far as process for me that I've never played with. I couldn't find anyone who had been working in any sort of, process like this. So it took me about a year just to really explore this. And so I liked the metaphor. I liked what it represented. And this was the first piece that I did. And I was in a class. The professor was pretty new, but she was awesome. It was an installation class, an art installation, completely out of my comfort zone. And the project was make an art piece that will only last a second and no longer than 24 hours. And so what I had kind of discovered is I was doing some screen printing, some silk screen, and I was able to push that limestone through the screen. So I was able to make these photographs or these images using that process and using this natural limestone material. And so what I had done is I had grabbed some dirt, I dug some dirt up at home, put it on a piece of board, screen printed a self-portrait of myself, and waited for a rainstorm because I wanted it to be a natural way for this image to disappear. And this video, I've sped it up a lot. So usually the video would be about 5 minutes long. But I'm going to go ahead and just play this. And there is sound, but in this case, I turned the sound off. And so the idea is that I wanted to see myself, because it was a question my son had asked me about death. He was about 8 years old, that really kind of sparked my interest in this topic. And so this fading essence of myself disappearing in a rainstorm became, just sort of it just opened up a whole new world to my work. At first it was a bit weird because, that was the last thing I wanted to do. I wanted to document, I wanted to go meet people and do all this work, that I imagined being as an art photographer, but this became very personal. And so this was another series that I did where I actually screen printed. This is a 40-inch by 60-inch screen print, one of the largest screens that I'd ever messed with. And I had transferred this image onto some dirt in my studio in Norman when I was going to OU. And so what I did is documented this each day on how what changes would happen throughout each day. And this is probably about a week's worth of movement. So essentially, you know, I'll tell you my inspiration, and some of you may already know this. Andy Goldsworthy, his work is all about, in my opinion, mortality. He does a lot of natural artwork out in, you know, nature, where he will build something and then just essentially disappears. But his really his artwork is his photographs. So in the same line of that, these are just some images that I shot of those. Just a little bit of process. This again, my studio. This kind of gives you an idea how long it took. And yes, speaking of aging, you know, you see a little bit of that gray popping up. Again, 10 years. This is about 11, 12 years ago when I was in grad school. And this is kind of the aftermath. And if you see the photographs on the back, this kind of leads me to another project I experimented with. I took 3 women in my life that mean the life to me. My daughter at the time, I think she was about 11, my wife, and then my mom. And so as I was thinking about those landscapes I was showing and trying to show this passage of time, I figured what I kind of came up with this is, you know, how can I do that with just showing 3 different ages of my subjects? And this is a quote that really meant a lot to me, and it definitely speaks to some of my later work, is Roland Barthes' essay in Camera Lucida. And ironically, Quinn, this is so bizarre, but if you've looked at that book, and obviously the Denial of Death, those were both of those authors' last books. They actually died when the book was published. So pretty fascinating in itself. But the idea that, you know, no photograph is archival. I mean, we may say that we're going to fix photographs and wash them, you know, and do all of that, but, you know, years and years and down the line, things are going to change. So I just love this quote. It meant a lot to this piece. And so with these images, I actually printed them. They were shot like on a Hasselblad medium format. I printed them, I think, as 16 by 20s, maybe a little larger. I went through the developer and I stopped there. I didn't do anything else. In the darkroom, I let them dry. And once I was finished and once they were dry, I took them to my studio, which had this amazing north light. It's an old World War II building that has since been torn down, and I just put them up. So initially I thought, okay, I'm not fixing, I'm only developing. They're going to turn black as soon as they're exposed to light. But I've always witnessed, you know, when you're walking out, a student brings out a print from the darkroom, your print goes black. Well, it's because it still has that developer and still interacting with, you know, with the emulsion and the silver. Whereas when it dries, it takes longer, but it does change. And that was kind of the idea, is I wanted to be able to show people this change taking place. So those images being up for a few weeks, getting all that UV essentially just started, even the developer started showing up, you know, these weird, this is a photo of my mom, and these almost look like tears to me. So it was very emotional. It was very, in a way, a bit disturbing, because I'm watching these images of my family essentially go away. So that's sort of, you know, kind of my first body of work that I experimented with. And I will tell you, the most bizarre thing about this is these images, even though I had started doing collodion way before I even went to grad school, these ended up almost looking like tintypes. So that was kind of another interesting kind of tidbit at the end. After this, you know, I thought, do I really want to pursue this for my thesis? Do I want to stay, you know, talking about this death anxiety, this mortality awareness? Right after my midway, which was this work, my wife found a lump on her breast, and she went in, had an ultrasound. I went with her, and once they did all the tests, they found out that she was stage 1 with triple negative breast cancer. Once we found that out, she also did a full scan and also found out that she had thyroid cancer. So she's 37 years old. I'm 39 at the time. We have 2 kids, and I'm in grad school, and it just kind of stopped things. And, we were stopped in our tracks. What in the world is going on? So my decision was do I stay in grad school or do I, take a break? I decided to stay in grad school. I talked to her, and I thought, well, let me see if I can mend this into my work. I was a little leery, but in this case, one of the things I'd been thinking about was how mirrors are also a way for us to deal with, in some cases, mortality. I mean, if you look at the old Vanitas, which I have some illustrations of, there's always a mirror in some of that work. And it, to me, a mirror represents, in a way, an ephemeral camera. You see that image of yourself every morning, and that reflection changes over time. This was a grade school photograph that we made for a Christmas ornament. And so that's obviously me as a grade schooler, and then me in contemporary times. So what I ended up doing as I'm researching all this stuff, and here's just some examples of some really old paintings that show the typical skull, the hourglass, flowers that will eventually die. This one has a mirror in it, the coins, the skull. All these metaphors, all these objects that represent, time, passage of time, memento mori, as we were saying. So my work ended up being collodion. So I went in going, I'm not going to do collodion, and then I left doing collodion, but in a completely different way. And so this is just video documentation of the work. A lot of times when I've done these presentations in the past, I will show the images as positives, and they look just like ambrotypes, tintypes. And to be honest with you, they're almost too realistic, and I just don't like looking at them that way. I don't like looking at the scans anymore. I would rather, this was my intention at first, and I'm kind of going back to that. So that's why the video documentation is part of this presentation. So was I worried about putting my wife out there, putting such a personal project out there? Yes. I talked to her. She actually is a photographer and worked as a photographer professionally. And we talked about this. I mean, part of her is like, is this going to get you through grad school? Yes. But, this is also a serious thing. We're putting your image out there with a family, that we're dealing with all this stuff. And, this was 10 years ago. I actually had my exhibit opening 10 years ago last night. So this has been, it's been some time. She's over it. She hardly ever talks about it anymore. We've moved on. But I feel like it's still good to at least share this experience. Sally Mann, Eugene Richards, documentary photographer, he did a book on his wife who had breast cancer, who actually died. But those were all influences of my work during the time. I was very fascinated during the opening how people looked at the work, because if you just go and just look at it, you may see a negative, or you may see a faint image. So in some ways, what happens is the person's face, the person's shirt, the person's body has to make the positive. And I really like that. I always hate when people just kind of walk by images and don't give them any sort of thought. So that was fun to watch. How, if someone's shorter, someone's taller, they're going to see a completely different image, a different experience. So that was important to me. As we talk about vanity, that was another thing that came up, because my wife also had to shave her hair, which I'll briefly show. This was something I caught during the opening. So this was someone actually fixing her hair in these very personal plates of my this, photographic journey that I did with my wife. So that I saw that several times. It was a Friday night. People were out, looking at art, different exhibits and stuff. So it became kind of an interesting tidbit, extra thing that I didn't even think about. So this was a quote from my wife that I think is important because, it's also her perspective. She's very strong. She's doing great now. So I don't want to forget to mention that. She's been cancer free for 10 years, which is awesome. But, it was important to let people know that this wasn't just my photography project. This was also hers. This was a collaborative project. I mean, she posed when there were days that, she didn't feel well. And I will tell you, as most of you know, when you're doing collodion, you shoot that one plate and you're like, no, I'm going to throw that away and go to the next one. That didn't happen very often. It was usually just a one plate type situation. And then I moved on because it was more in the raw. I didn't care all the time about what my plates looked like. It was more what I was capturing. This is her shaving her head. This also was something I wanted to put in the exhibit, and it's going to speed up here in a little bit because this is a pretty long video. I felt like it was important to show her strength in this. I didn't want people to look at these reflections and think, oh, look how sick she is. No, she was strong. She would have chemo one day. The next day she would be out running a couple of miles. I mean, she was determined to beat this. And, that, again, that denial, but also that the ways that we overcome that fear and that anxiety of death. The piece on the floor was a last minute thing to kind of draw all this together, and it's a family portrait. So I had my plates, I had the video, and I had this plexiglass tray that was filled with about 5 gallons of water. And I will tell you, it was the most stressful thing to do, to put that on a gallery floor. And then you have hundreds of people coming in on a Friday night, drinking, walking around, not watching where they're going. My exhibit was basically guarding that big tray of water. Most people had no idea what it was going to do. I had a sense of what it might do, but I was really surprised. And just give you some context, I didn't think this would happen, but these kids went up and just started playing in the water. But it wasn't aggressive. They weren't ruining the photo. It was just kind of a nice slice of that time to just show people, hey, this is a photograph. It's fragile. And I said, no. The parents were like, oh, get out of there. I was like, no, this is great. A week later, the gallery calls me and said, Mark, there's something wrong with your photograph. And I got really excited. I was like, are you kidding me? What's it doing? They're like, what did you put in it? It's starting to break apart. I was like, nothing. It's water. So essentially a week after it looked like that, the week after that, I had to defend my thesis. And so this is what it looked like during my thesis defense, when all the faculty there, students, and we're looking at this big blob on the floor. But I can't tell you how excited I was to defend this, because this is what all my work was about. It was about showing this transition that happens to us personally, but also to these physical objects. And the really interesting thing about this is when I document this, my face somehow appeared. So, there was just a little bit of that emulsion left that you can make out my face. So I didn't plan that. It was all just kind of what I see is what I get. And I just kind of want to end with this. And then if we have time, Quinn, I could show a couple of plates. But, I learned so much doing this project. I wouldn't do it again just because, it's like, no, that's something that's in the past. It was 10 years ago. It's definitely something that You know, I'm glad I did it. I think it was very for both of us, therapeutic. My kids experienced this, my family experienced this, but we moved on. It's 10 years later, and it really has. I guess it's really opened me up to making different type of photographs. I'm not stuck with collodion. I'm not stuck with digital. And I realize that, you can be personal with your work. I didn't intend to do this for anyone else. It was for me. But the conversations I had, which I love when I show this in person, I love when people come up and say, wow, I lost my mom, or, and they see my wife there. She's now a nurse. I mean, it changed her whole life. She's actually, she helps, she works at a hospital, and helps deliver babies and takes care of babies and moms, at that first step of their life. So I think it's really fascinating to kind of see. Now I look back at it in 10 years where we are. It's definitely, I don't know. It was an interesting experience. I'm glad I did it, but would I do it again? Hell no.
Beautiful presentation, Mark.
So anyway, that's what I have. So
I know people are going to love that. Could we open it up just for a few, and then we can show some plates if you want?
Yeah, definitely.
Throw it out there, see if people have some questions. I'm sure they do. If you have any questions, type them in the comments, or come on and you can unmute yourself and ask Mark himself there. That's a beautiful, it's a great segue to go from Becker's ideas and theories into something tangible art-wise. I would argue that all of our photographs are this, right? It's just that you've taken it to a personal level with struggling with disease and loss and all that. But let's see. That's a nice comment. Thank you, Jan. That's nice.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
If you have a question, just put it in the comments there. So what on that last on the family portrait where you see your face a little bit, describe that a little bit technical for us. What was it that was happening there?
So what I was doing it with small prints. I was like, I knew I wanted something else in the gallery. I'd done the collodion plates. I wanted something else to kind of tie all this in together, because it is about our family, our loss, when we lose someone in our family, when we watch them change and age. So what I ended up kind of experimenting with is just printing photographs in the darkroom, traditional darkroom, fiber-based paper. Ironically, you would think fiber-based would last a little longer. But what I found out is, when you submerge something in water, and especially if it's unfixed, there's no hardener in the fixer, it just gives up. And so, it's just water. It's what we need for life, and it's what photography needs for its life. But when done improperly, when exposed to a longer period of time, it just gives up. So I think what happens, and what was great, is some of the photography faculty that had been doing this for a long time, they were like, we just thought it would turn black in the gallery, which would have been interesting, but I'd already done work pretty similar to that. So from what I can guess is just, there's a point to where, the gelatin just gives up, and that silver, you could see that silver just kind of just slide off. It was beautiful to see, but to be honest with you, most of the work that I showed you, other than these plates, I don't have. I only have them in photographs. But that was also kind of the purpose. I mean, I couldn't sell any of them. I couldn't make any money, to pay for that really expensive grad school that I went to, like you did, Quinn. I'm always jealous of that. But that was the purpose. That was the purpose. I wanted to show that this work is here and gone, and we may say that our photos are going to last forever, but they're not.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that obviously the metaphor of the mirror and impermanence and everything, those would be considered ambrotypes, right? Direct positives. So they would be on a glass a glass ambrotype, a mirror ambrotype.
Yeah,
and so it's interesting that James Ambrose, the ambrotype, ambrosis in Greek, immortal,
oh yeah,
all of these connections that we weave through this work, and the work gets really good the deeper you go and the more connections you make for the universal, in this case, the universal human condition of inevitability of death. And so now we don't know when we're going to die. We're reminded every day that we could die. I could get up from the chair, stumble, and hit my head on the wall, and I'm dead. So it's constant there. But when you have a direct threat to your mortality, like your wife, and that impermanence of life, then you start weaving this tapestry, if you will, of deep connections and deep ideas about the homo mortalis, or the immortal man, our desire to survive and breed and live on forever. It all boils back down to this. I can look at any photographic project, even yours is completely direct, which is really straightforward, but even a straight on digital color landscape work, I can find where these influences are happening. So it's nice to see direct work like this and have people come on and spell it out for people. This is what we're talking about. And then my question is, were you aware of Becker's theories? Were you aware of Solomon's theories and the worm at the core, and how much of that played into this? Because when you talk about your wife, you have a prime example here of death anxiety and death denial. So I'm just curious your thoughts or where you went on that.
Yeah. So when I was showing the earlier work, way before my wife was diagnosed, and I was, I had touched on Ernest Becker's book during one of my critiques, but as you know, it's a pretty heavy read. There's a lot of theories in there, and you kind of have to weed through a lot of stuff, and it's heavy, definitely. When I was presenting that, I had a faculty member in the critique say, "Hey, have you seen this movie Flight from Death that was done?" And I recommend, and Quinn, I don't know if that's going to be a movie that you eventually recommend, but I would say,
my recommended watching is today.
Yeah.
My recommended reading is today.
See, we're thinking alike, and that was.
People think this is all planned out. It's not.
It's not. And that's why when you were talking about this, that was probably around 2008 or so when someone mentioned that movie. So that's when I was exposed to Solomon and all of those other avenues of the terror management theory. And so I wrote about it in my paper. My thesis was sort of kind of this huge artist statement, back it up with research, show examples of other photographers, other artists. But I definitely, I ordered the script to that movie, and I just love some of the stuff they say. It really brought home some of my, some of the stuff I was scratching on the surface.
Totally. Yeah. You were right there knocking on its door.
Yeah. So when you mentioned Solomon and about the show and everything, I'm like, oh man, I love any lecture that he does, I'll watch. It's like, why can't I go just sit in his classroom for a semester?
Yeah. So for those of you that are still interested, I've been in communication with Sheldon Solomon. He's a experimental social psychologist that wrote, he and his partners wrote The Worm at the Core on Becker. He's the guy, and his team brought Becker into, that's why we're having this conversation. He's going to be on the show in about 4 or 5 weeks. I'm going to have him on as a guest, and he can come in here and clarify these ideas. I've already talked to him about, I'm trying to make the connection for artists, specifically photographers, and we can get into all kinds of metaphors with the dead process, the 19th century work of post-mortem photography. There's all kinds of metaphors that surround the process that we work in, generally most people here. And so I'm going to have him on talking about some of the connections, and he can clarify some of these more dense points. I've studied Becker and Solomon for a while now, and I tell you, if I was younger, a little bit younger, I'd do a PhD on their work, no doubt about it. But It's fascinating. So if you're interested, Mark was kind of the impetus of that. He said, you should write Sheldon and see, and I did. And Sheldon wrote back, real nice guy.
Yeah, that's great.
I said, yeah, I'll be happy to come on and chat with you guys. So he's going to come on. So Mark, do you want to show a couple of your click here?
Let me try to switch over the camera here.
You might have to close that one down and share it again.
Yeah. So you probably see a blank frame. I don't know, Quinn, is there any way you can make that larger or?
Yeah, you can, I think.
Okay. Let me activate my camera here.
Let's see, where are you? Can I? Maybe not. How about
what did I do here? So I've got two screens going on. It looks like my PowerPoint. If you
stop sharing on your PowerPoint.
Okay.
And go back and share your screen to your.
Okay, I got it. Okay. All right, there it is. So you guys can see this camera. Okay, perfect. So yeah, these are. This is nothing. I mean, I didn't invent some process like a lot of people will claim with collodion. Hey, look, I'm the first to do this. No, I think I read about doing mirror plates probably from Quinn's forum, but also I think Coffer had mentioned it of using front surface mirrors to do faux daguerreotype. So this is definitely nothing new, but these are not front surface mirrors. It was really important for me just to get mirrors. People would buy these mirrors to look at themselves. You know, that was kind of the idea. And plus the fragility of them. I was pretty bad on some of them as far as cutting, and a couple of them I broke during, processing or whatever, but I'm just going to kind of flip through some of these.
Yeah. And Mark, let me jump in here as you do that.
Yeah.
So people know, mirror versus front surface mirrors. Mirrors have the glass on them, and front surface mirrors, like what's in your DSLR or your SLR, there's no glass on it. So front surface mirror, I call them in my books, I call them faux daguerreotypes, right? We, like you said, Mark, they've been done. I don't know. I think I did some 2000 long ago. Not something I could ever use. You put it to good use. Yeah, those are great.
And so I used to have a website. I'm planning on building another, but I actually deleted my website a few years ago. Sorry, my connection went off. Should be coming back on. Mainly because a lot of the plates that I was showing they were all positives. You couldn't see that these were mirrors, and they looked like collodion. That wasn't my intention at all. It was funny because when you're in grad school, a lot of times they don't want to hear about the process as much unless it really connects. And so it was funny at the end. A lot of the faculty were coming, well, how'd you put those on mirrors? Because I maybe briefly mentioned collodion. So I just thought it was kind of ironic. It's like, well, I didn't think you wanted to hear about process at all. But when you're at that point, you're like, either you're going to pass me or you're not. So you can only joke.
I love to see those tilted up. I love that negative image.
Yeah, and my copy stand is upside down, so that's why I'm upside down when you see me in the reflection.
Oh, that's great. Those are awesome, Mark.
Oh. And I should say that these are unvarnished.
Yeah.
And the reason why is I varnished a few and they just lost. First of all, I know most of you hate varnishing. I know you've done whole sections on your show just on varnishing, but I decided not to varnish them for a couple of reasons. One, I felt like they lost their effect, but also, there again, permanence, non-permanence. So, I mean, Quinn, you could tell me a little more what's going to happen in, so many years than I probably know. But,
well, what you have there on the surface, right, unvarnished, you have direct positives on a piece of mirror. So that's silver, pure metallic silver, all the highlights on his portraits, her face and hair, all those dark spots there are all highlights silver. So the sulfides in the air, depending on where you live, it might happen in a month or it might happen in 10 years. The sulfides in the air will start attacking that pure metallic silver. And so when you put sulfite and silver together, you get silver sulfite, which is black, which tarnishes your silverware. That's what'll happen to these. Now, being in Oklahoma, you'll probably survive many, many years. If you were in an industrial city like, who knows, some big, polluting city, they might only last a couple of months.
This was the thyroid, when she had her thyroid removed.
Well, that's cool. They survived 10 years like that.
Unless I drop them.
Yeah.
Or we jokingly say she's going to come in here and break them all.
Yeah.
Don't want to see them anymore.
Yeah.
So anyway, this was about a year documentation. Her hair started growing back at the end. So yeah, like I said, I don't want to take too much any more time, but just show a few of these where her hair started growing back.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway.
And I love how you use that aesthetic of Sally Mann. It kind of harkens to her family portraits and things. I like that aesthetic too. Yeah,
definitely a huge influence in my work. Sally Mann, how she kind of makes these connections, with her work is just amazing. So
yeah, at some point in time, my goal in the next few years is to have every artist, photographer talking about and thinking about Becker's theories. I mean, because you can always, this is a universal thing. This doesn't just apply to photography or artists. This is kind of a universal human thing that if people can kind of throw a little pebble in people's shoes and make them think about this stuff a little bit, you'll find as an artist, and Mark, you just explained very well, you'll find as an artist, once you start exploring those deeper, more conceptual ideas, rather, and again, there's nothing wrong with talking about lenses and chemicals. Most artists and most photographers today wouldn't be interested in any of this. I guarantee you there's a ton of people that clicked out of this 5 minutes into my thing, just because it's just too much. It's too much. I don't understand it. My frame, I don't think about this stuff. It means nothing to me. If you're not going to talk about iodides and varnish, I'm out, right? Mm-hmm. They don't think they can get anything out of it. But my goal is, at least over a period of time, is try to introduce these ideas and the theories, and then have the big boys come on and solidify everything, and just really put those. It's just a well of fodder for artists. If you get into this, I saw it in your work, and like you said, you're just scratching the surface. Most of the work artists make now are dealing with that surface stuff. And then they can pull you in deeper with the conceptual stuff. And if you have good, I'm going to show you in the next 6 weeks, there's empirical data on these theories. There's absolutely empirical data. This is not somebody's opinion. I know people would argue with that, but there's data on this. And we'll show you that data. If you hang with me for 5 or 6 weeks with these shows, you'll get it. You'll get it if you just give me a chance. So Jeffrey says, I remember watching an old episode of Studio Q from a few years ago. I think it was Dale Wilson that has a similar exhibition of his work that eventually faded. Cyanotypes, I think it was. I don't think it was Dale, but yeah, that's interesting. I kind of remember that too. Anybody ring a bell there? Fading cyanotypes and permanent cyanotypes. Mark mentioned Goldsworthy, Andy Goldsworthy. You can look him up. He goes out in nature and builds these rock formations, and he does these icicle formations, little pieces of ice, intricate, beautiful work. Then he photographs it. It's all impermanent and all that kind of stuff. Boguslav says, thanks, Mark. Great story, ideas, and experiment with photography. Yes, absolutely, I agree. And everybody's compliment. So that was awesome. I appreciate you coming on and doing that. Anybody have any more questions for Mark? Yeah, there's a lot of good comments there.
Dale.
Mark says, or Dale says, no, not I, although I've had many fade, not by design, yeah. Or breakage, that kind of thing. Yeah, so thank you, a million thanks, Mark. I'm going to try maybe every other weekend, get a guest in here, somebody to show work that's dealing with these same ideas. Dimitrios's work the other week would have been a nice one as well, too. But any work that you're doing, even if you don't understand it, that's dealing with impermanence or death anxiety, death denial, hit me up. We'll get you on here and we can talk about it. And maybe we can help you make some connections through really good kind of I don't want to call it scientific, but really good, solid data. And again, if you hang with me, these ideas will come together over time for you with examples and those kinds of things, and I think you'll appreciate it. I hope you appreciate it anyway. Let's see. Let's go back to this thing here real quick. Can I add that to the stream? So thank you, Mark. That was wonderful. Guess what my recommended reading is? Oh my God. Have you ever heard of this book? I've been preoccupied with this thing for I don't know how long now. Definitely read it if you can. The Answer to Why of Human Existence. Boom. And it is a contrast to the predominant Freudian school of thought. I like that. Recommended watching, just like Mark just said. I'll play this, a little trailer here.
I believe Paul Tillich had it right. Paul Tillich says you don't conquer the anxiety about dying. You meet it with courage.
Is that the end of it? Did I start at the end? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, guys. Here, let's do this. Let's try this. Sorry. I must have hit that turning the volume up. Here we go. Hello? Yeah.
To have emerged from nothing, to have a name, consciousness of self, deep inner feelings, an excruciating inner yearning for life and self-expression. And with all this, yet to die.
Boom.
Humankind has always been restless. Never satisfied with our physical limitations, we have always strived for more. With machines, we conquer gravity and travel faster and farther than any other animal. We explore the heavens, the last great frontier.
Landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
And we manipulate our own biology through medical science. In defiance of nature, we have manufactured the means to become rulers of the natural world. What is left to conquer? And are we satisfied? Since time immemorial, we have battled our greatest limitation. One which seems to render our efforts to overcome and conquer insignificant. Every day we participate in a multitude of activities to distance ourselves from harm and death. But beneath the surface, we are aware that these day-to-day strategies are doomed to fail. We will die eventually. And all of this will come to an end. Human beings find themselves in quite the predicament. We have the mental capacity to ponder the infinite, seemingly capable of anything, yet housed in a heart-pumping, breath-gasping, decaying body. We are godly, yet creaturely.
Oh boy. Okay. I thought that was a trailer. I'm playing the whole movie. Anyway, I would have sat there and watched it. I thought, man, this is a long trailer. Okay. You get the idea there. It's watch it if you can. It's a great, like Mark says, it'll kind of change your perspective, so to speak, on these ideas, and it does really give a great layman's introduction to these theories and ideas. So that's all I have, which is plenty, I'm sure, for most of you. If you have any questions, throw them up there. If you have any comments or anything, we've already gone over half an hour, but who cares? If you hang out, you hang out. I hope, again, like I said, to have another little piece of these puzzles every week for the next few weeks, and then, like I said, culminating in having Sheldon Solomon come on. He's actually in this film as well. You can't miss Sheldon. Sheldon is everywhere. He's the face of terror management theory. Terror management theory is the work of three gentlemen, Greenberg, Skaczynski, I can't remember Tom's last name, Skaczynski, I think, and Sheldon Solomon. Those three wrote the book, The Worm at the Core, which is the data about putting Becker's theories into practice, which is absolutely fascinating. Once you understand those theories and then you look at the practical application, you'll be amazed. So thank you, Will. Will says, great show. Looking forward to it. Thank you, man. That makes me feel good. I thought I'd be in here alone talking to me and Mark, just talking alone together. So I'm thoroughly pleased. So thanks for hanging out with me, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you did. I'll do my best to prepare this week for another episode next week. If you have a project, a work that you're dealing with death anxiety, impermanence, anything around these topics, please get a hold of me, wetplate@gmail.com, and we'll get you on here and we'll integrate you in with these ideas and theories and try to help people understand it. Thanks again, Mr. Zimmerman. You're wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate everybody coming in and spending time with us today. It was a great show. Thank you for everything and everybody. And we'll stay safe, stay healthy. Oh, I get my vaccine, my first dose of vaccine Tuesday morning at 7 o'clock. Can you imagine? But so that's on the docket. We'll see you, if I don't die of that vaccine shot, death denial, right? We'll see you next Saturday at the same time. I'll be fine. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you next week. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.